The sky hung low and heavy over Asheville that afternoon, the clouds weeping a slow, relentless drizzle onto the rows of mourners gathered around Evan's grave. I stood there, numb, the cold rain sliding down my cheeks, blending with the tears I could no longer control. My fingers tightened around the damp, black umbrella, the metal ribs creaking under the pressure. Evan was gone just like that. 1 minute we were planning our retirement trips to Italy and Maine, and the next I was standing over a fresh mound of earth, trying to remember how to breathe. The pastor's words blurred into the background, a soft murmur against the roaring emptiness inside me. I barely registered the hands that squeezed my shoulder, the whispered condolences that floated by like ghosts. None of it mattered. Only the brutal, undeniable fact that Evan was lying 6 feet below me, silent forever, mattered. I didn't notice Miles moving until he was suddenly there, stepping into my blurred line of vision. His hand, still warm from life, grasped mine a little too tightly. I blinked up at him, expecting a look of shared grief, maybe a brotherly squeeze of reassurance. Instead, I saw something else, something that didn't belong in a place like this. Before I could react, Miles dropped to one knee right there in the soggy grass, his black suit darkened by the rain. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he pulled out a small black velvet box from his coat pocket. My heart slammed against my ribs. No, this couldn't be real. Claire, he said, voice low but loud enough that every ear around us caught every syllable. Evan would have wanted you to be taken care of. And I promise, you'll never have to be alone. Marry me. Time fractured. The raindrops froze in midair. The world spun away from me. I could feel the dozens of eyes burning into my back, the collective intake of breath, the stifled whispers rising like a wave about to crash over me. Somewhere to my left, I heard Maya gasp softly. To my right, Owen stiffened. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My mind screamed for me to pull away, to run, to shout, but my body stayed rooted, paralyzed by humiliation so sharp it sliced deeper than the grief. I stared down at Miles, at the absurd sparkle of the ring inside the box, and for a moment I honestly thought I might faint. He smiled up at me, a smile that was wrong, all wrong, a twisted imitation of comfort. It wasn't love. It wasn't grief. It was ownership. I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. I simply pulled my hand away, slowly, as if touching him any longer might burn me alive. The box trembled slightly in his hand, the tiny diamond catching the gray light like a mocking star. A thick silence swallowed the cemetery. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the pastor shifted uncomfortably, his Bible lowering to his side. Miles's smile faltered, confusion flickering across his face as he remained kneeling, waiting for something that would never come. Slowly, I turned away, my legs trembling but determined, and walked back toward the funeral home without looking back. Each step felt like dragging a boulder behind me, but I kept walking. Behind me, I heard murmurs beginning to swell, the low, scandalized hum of disbelief that would ripple through every corner of our small town by sundown. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Inside me, something cracked, but something else, something colder and sharper, began to take shape. I didn't know then just how deep the betrayal ran. I didn't know the full extent of what Miles had planned. But standing there, soaked to the bone, abandoned by the man I loved, I made a silent vow. Whatever game Miles thought he was playing, he had just made the gravest mistake of his life, and I would not forget it. It wasn't always like this, not even close. There was a time when my life had felt like something pulled from the pages of a storybook, simple and real and breathtakingly good. Evan and I met when we were barely 20, both stubborn and broke and wildly in love with the future we thought we could build. We married in a small chapel on the edge of town, surrounded by family and friends who cheered like we had just discovered the secret to life itself. The early years were not easy. We scraped by on minimum wage jobs, sharing cheap coffee and dreams bigger than our apartment could hold. There were nights we argued over bills, over missed opportunities, over the ache of wanting more. But somehow, every argument ended the same way, in quiet apologies whispered under shared blankets, in the tight grip of hands that refused to let go, in laughter that healed faster than it hurt. Evan was not a perfect man, but he was perfect for me. He had this way of making the smallest things feel significant. A handwritten note left by my coffee cup each morning, a soft kiss on my forehead when he thought I was asleep, a surprise bouquet of wildflowers stolen from the side of the highway just because he thought they looked like me. He was steady where I was anxious, patient where I was restless. He loved me the way people pray to be loved, without condition, without fear. When Maya was born, I thought my heart might burst from the sheer enormity of it all. Evan cried harder than I did, cradling her tiny body like she was the most fragile and precious thing in the universe. 2 years later, Owen arrived, quiet and wide-eyed, already studying the world with the same thoughtful intensity as his father. Our little family was not rich by any stretch, but we were abundant in ways that mattered. Those years blurred together into a mosaic of memories: soccer games under 2 bright floodlights, school concerts where Maya's voice cracked with nerves, birthday parties where Owen's laughter rang louder than the music. Evan was there for all of it, camera in hand, pride written across his face like a permanent tattoo. He was the man who fixed broken bikes, who taught them how to tie their shoes, who stayed up all night helping with last-minute science projects. He was the kind of father children grow up believing all fathers should be. Professionally, Evan found his calling as a financial advisor. His clients adored him for the same reasons I did: his steadiness, his empathy, the quiet way he made you believe everything would be okay. We built a life around that steadiness, layer by careful layer, until it felt unshakable, eternal. Miles was always around, of course. Evan's younger brother by 3 years. He was louder, flashier, always chasing something newer, shinier, faster. I used to think of him as the wayward sibling, the one still searching for a place to land. He'd show up to our family barbecues with a different woman on his arm each summer, tell outrageous stories that made everyone laugh too hard, drink too much, and then disappear for months at a time. Evan loved him, though, forgave him everything, trusted him blindly. Looking back, I see now how much I missed the subtle glances, the jokes that carried barbed edges, the way Miles's admiration for Evan sometimes tilted into something darker. But back then I dismissed it. Family was complicated, I told myself. Loyalty mattered more than discomfort. When Maya and Owen left for college, Evan and I entered a new chapter, just the 2 of us again. Empty nesters, they called it. For us, it felt like rediscovery. We took long walks through the Blue Ridge Mountains, hand in hand, dreaming of all the places we would finally go. Tuscany in the spring, a tiny cottage in Maine, late mornings and lazy cups of coffee without schedules dictating our lives. We made plans like we had all the time in the world. We didn't. I didn't know. I couldn't have known. That time was already slipping away faster than I could grasp it. That the man who had built my life with me was already living on borrowed moments. That the love I thought would last forever was standing at the edge of an ending I wasn't ready to see. It started, like so many things do, with a joke, the kind that leaves a bitter aftertaste long after the laughter fades. It was our 25th wedding anniversary, a small gathering at our home with close friends and family packed tightly into the living room, their voices rising and falling over the soft clink of wine glasses and the muted strains of old love songs floating from the speakers. Evan stood and tapped his glass with the edge of his fork, his smile sheepish but radiant in the candlelight. He looked at me like I was the only person in the world. "To Claire," he said, his voice catching slightly, "the woman who made every struggle worth it, every dream possible. You are my partner, my compass, my home, and there's not a day I don't thank God for you." The room erupted into warm applause, and I felt my face flush with happiness, real, aching, overwhelming happiness. Then Miles stood up a little too fast, a little too loud. He raised his glass high, grinning in that careless, reckless way of his. "Here's to Evan," he boomed. for somehow locking down the best woman in the family before the rest of us even had a shot. People laughed, good-natured if a little awkwardly. Evan chuckled, giving Miles a playful shake of his head, but there was a flash of discomfort behind his eyes that flickered and was gone before I could name it. Miles didn't sit down. He shifted his stance, turned directly toward Evan, and, in a voice dripping with charm, added, "You know, big brother, if you ever get tired of married life, or heaven forbid, something happens to you, don't worry. I'll be there to keep Claire company." The laughter faltered. A few chuckles, unsure and forced, broke the strange silence that followed. My smile froze midair. Evan blinked once, twice, and then, because he was Evan, because he believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, he laughed, clapping Miles on the shoulder with a gentleness that masked something colder underneath. "Careful, Miles," Evan said lightly, "or I'll start locking the doors when you come visit." The tension snapped, the crowd laughed again, louder this time, grateful for the return to normalcy, but I didn't laugh. I couldn't. There was something about the way Miles had looked at me when he said it, not teasing, not drunk, but deliberate, sharp, almost hungry. Later that night, when the house was dark and quiet, I lay beside Evan and whispered, "Did you hear what Miles said?" My voice was too small, too unsure. Evan, half asleep, tightened his arm around me and murmured, "He's just being stupid, Claire. Don't let him get to you. You know how he is. All talk, no sense." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. Miles was family. He had always been the loud, inappropriate uncle to our kids, the brother Evan had promised his dying mother he would protect. Families were messy, complicated, imperfect. You didn't just turn your back because of one off-color joke, right? But even as Evan's breathing evened out and the room slipped into shadows, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, the memory of Miles's gaze burning into the darkness. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was my own grief, my own guilt, twisting things into something they weren't. I told myself a lot of things, and in doing so, I missed the beginning of everything that would come after. The tiny hairline cracks forming beneath the surface of our lives. The first quiet signs of the man who had stood beside us at every barbecue. Every holiday, every milestone had been waiting, watching, and calculating in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. I closed my eyes that night and told myself it was nothing. But deep down, I think part of me already knew it wasn't. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary, forgettable morning you never imagine will be your last. I was still upstairs, brushing my hair in the mirror, humming along to a song playing faintly from the radio. Downstairs, I could hear Evan moving around the kitchen, the comforting clatter of mugs and the low gurgle of the coffee maker sputtering to life. It was the sound of our life, normal, safe ours. I didn't realize anything was wrong at first. It was the silence that struck me, abrupt, unnatural. The music kept playing, a bright, chirpy melody that now sounded unbearably cruel against the heavy stillness pressing down over the house. I set down my brush, a sudden weight in my chest pulling me toward the door. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw him. Evan was slumped against the kitchen counter, the coffee pot shattered on the floor beside him, dark liquid spreading across the tile like blood. His eyes were open but unfocused, his mouth moving slightly, soundlessly as if trying to call for me. I screamed his name once, twice. I don't even remember my feet touching the steps as I flew down. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands fumbling for his pulse, for anything that would tell me he was still there, still mine. His skin was too cold, his body too still. The 911 operator's voice was calm, clinical, asking questions I could barely understand through my own sobbing pleas. The paramedics came quickly, but time had already hardened around us like concrete. I sat frozen on the kitchen floor, coffee soaking into my jeans as they worked over him, shouting, compressing, shocking, and then stillness again. Final, irreversible stillness. A massive heart attack, they said later. No warning signs. Nothing anyone could have done. It was fast, they said, as if that was supposed to be a comfort, as if the speed of it somehow made it easier to bear. But there was no easing this kind of loss. There was no preparing for the way a house could turn into a tomb in a matter of minutes. No bracing for the moment you realized half of yourself had been ripped away without even a goodbye. In the hours that followed, people came. Friends, neighbors, distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. They moved through the house like shadows, offering casseroles and condolences, their faces blurred by the film of my disbelief. Someone must have called Miles, because he arrived too, a little breathless, a little too composed, clasping my hands in his like he was claiming something. I was too broken to notice, or to care. The funeral planning happened around me, not through me. Decisions were made about flowers, about music, about caskets, none of which seemed real or important. Miles took the lead, stepping in where Evan would have, coordinating, comforting, controlling, always nearby, always watching. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed that night, staring at Evan's pillow. It still held the shape of his head, the faint scent of his cologne. I curled into that space, clutching it to my chest, and cried until my throat burned and my body shook with the force of it. I thought the worst was over, that losing Evan would be the deepest wound I'd ever have to survive. I was wrong. The real betrayal hadn't even begun yet. In the days following the funeral, Miles was everywhere. At first, I was grateful, or maybe just too hollowed out to question it. He handled the endless parade of paperwork, answered calls I couldn't bear to pick up, made quiet decisions about things I didn't have the strength to face. I told myself it was kindness, family stepping in when I needed them most. But kindness should have felt lighter, not like a tightening noose. Miles began rearranging things almost immediately. He moved the armchair Evan had favored from its spot near the window, said it was too painful for me to look at. He cleared out Evan's clothes before I could even breathe in their scent one last time, said it was necessary, practical. Decisions were made faster than I could protest, faster than I could even think. You need to focus on healing, Claire, Miles said one afternoon as he packed up a box of Evan's personal files without asking. His voice was low, soothing, practiced. Let me take care of everything. Evan would have wanted that. Maybe he was right. Maybe Evan would have wanted me spared from the endless logistics of death. Or maybe Evan would have wanted me to have the choice. But I said nothing. I nodded numbly, shrinking a little more inside myself each day, grateful for anything that kept the crushing weight of grief at bay. It wasn't just the house. It was the accounts, too. Miles insisted it was too much for me to handle right now. The bank calls, the lawyer meetings, the tangled web of insurance and estate paperwork. You don't need that stress, he said, always with a smile. Trust me. I trusted him, because for a while, trusting anyone was easier than trusting myself. Maya and Owen leaned on him, too. They were grieving in their own ways, lost and adrift, and Miles offered a steady hand, a clear direction. I watched my children listen to him more than me, seek his advice before mine, nod when he spoke with that same easy authority he used to command attention at parties. It stung a slow, dull ache that I buried beneath my smiles and polite thank yous. At dinners, when we even bothered to sit together, Miles dominated the conversations. He joked about Evan's quirks, made light-hearted comments about how Claire would need all the help she could get now. Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. The worst part wasn't what he said. It was how easily everyone believed him. Little by little, I stopped offering opinions. What was the point? Decisions about the house, about finances, even about family gatherings, were made without me or in front of me, as if I wasn't even there. I became a bystander in my own life, a fragile figure draped in mourning black, too delicate to be consulted, too broken to matter. Miles framed it all so well, so sweetly. He wasn't taking over, he was protecting me. He wasn't controlling, he was helping. He wasn't isolating me, he was surrounding me with support. And I, weakened by loss and dulled by despair, let him. It wasn't a sudden fall. It was erosion, slow, invisible, inevitable. A gradual crumbling of identity, of confidence, of voice. I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. Stopped recognizing the woman who once ran a household, who once stood beside Evan as a partner and equal of force. Instead, there was only this muted version of me, smiling at the right moments, nodding along, grateful for scraps of kindness disguised as chains. In the quiet hours of the night, when the house creaked and the grief settled heavy on my chest, I would sometimes wonder, was this what it meant to survive? To shrink small enough that no one would have to notice you breaking? If it was, I wasn't sure I wanted to survive at all. The suggestion came on a Sunday afternoon, folded neatly between polite conversation and carefully crafted concern. We were sitting at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, where Evan and I had once spent lazy mornings planning our future. The same table where birthdays had been celebrated, where homework had been spread out, where life had happened. Now it felt like a courtroom, and I was the defendant without even realizing I was on trial. Miles leaned forward, his fingers steepled under his chin, wearing the expression of a man delivering bad news he had convinced himself was kindness. "Claire," he said gently, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time for you to take a little break." I stared at him, uncomprehending. A break? My voice sounded foreign, hollow even to my own ears. He nodded, his tone maddeningly patient. "The house, it's too much for you. All these memories, it's not healthy to stay surrounded by them. You need space. Time to heal." Maya and Owen sat silently across from me, their faces guarded, their eyes sliding away from mine when I searched them for support. A small, trembling part of me still hoped they would speak up, would say, "No, Mom, you're strong, you can stay." But they said nothing. "You could stay with Leona for a few months," Miles continued, referencing my older sister. "Get some fresh air. Focus on yourself. Let me handle the estate, the finances. Evan would have wanted you to be taken care of." Taken care of. The words thudded in my chest like stones. Taken care of as if I were a child, as if I were incapable, as if the life Evan and I had built together, brick by painstaking brick, was something I could simply step away from, like a guest overstaying her welcome. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam my fists against the table, to demand they see me, really see me, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was sit there and listen to my life being dismantled under the guise of love. "You don't have to decide right away," Miles said, smiling warmly, reassuringly, like a hunter soothing a wounded animal before the kill. "But the sooner you start this healing journey, the better. For everyone. Everyone. Not for me. For them. For the neatness of it all. For the ease of sweeping grief under the rug and pretending the broken woman in the corner didn't make the air heavier just by existing." I looked at Maya, willing her to meet my eyes, to fight for me even a little. She picked at the edge of her sleeve, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. Owen fidgeted with his phone, pretending not to notice the silent plea radiating from me. Something cracked inside me then. Not a loud, dramatic shattering, but a quiet, irrevocable break. I realized that I had already been erased, piece by piece, moment by moment, until now, when even my place in my own home was no longer mine to claim. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. That night, when the house was silent and Miles and the children had retreated to whatever corners they now occupied, I packed a small bag. A few clothes, Evan's old sweater, my wedding ring tucked into the deepest pocket. I didn't leave a note at first, but at the last moment, I scribbled something on the back of an old receipt and left it on the kitchen table. "I'm not broken. I just need space. Please don't contact me." Then I walked out the front door into the crisp night air, the world vast and unwelcoming before me. And I didn't look back. I wasn't running. I wasn't giving up. I was choosing, for the first time in longer than I could remember, not to let them decide who I was any more. I drove without a destination, the night folding itself around me like a shroud. Highway signs blurred past, glowing and meaningless, as I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my knuckles aching from the strain. I didn't cry, not at first. There was nothing left inside me big enough for tears, only a dull, grinding emptiness that devoured every thought before it could fully form. Hours later, Just as the first bruised light of dawn began bleeding across the horizon, I found myself in Crescent Bay, a small coastal town Evan and I had once promised each other we would return to when life slowed down. We had imagined lazy mornings by the water, long walks on the beach, growing old together under wide, endless skies. I never thought I would come back alone, a ghost of the woman who had once dreamed here. The inn I stumbled into was old, its paint peeling, its carpets worn thin from years of indifferent footsteps. But it was anonymous, and that was all I needed. I paid cash for a room, ignoring the curious glance of the woman at the front desk, and climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. The room smelled faintly of mildew and salt. The bed sagged in the middle. The window rattled in its frame every time the wind picked up. It was perfect. It matched the hollow ache inside me, so precisely it felt almost deliberate. I slept for hours or maybe days. Time lost all meaning. Meals were an afterthought, cups of instant coffee, vending machine crackers, nothing that required effort or memory. I wrapped myself in Evan's old sweater, burying my face in its faded scent, and let the world shrink down to the four walls of that room and the constant, insistent beating of my own broken heart. Nights were the worst. The silence was too loud, filled with all the things I hadn't said, all the goodbyes I hadn't been allowed to speak. Some nights I wandered down to the beach, the cold sand gritting between my toes, the wind howling like some ancient grief that had finally found its voice. I thought about walking into the ocean more than once, not out of a desire to die, exactly, but out of a desperate need to stop existing in this endless, suspended state of pain. I wrote, too, scribbling fragments of thoughts onto napkins, receipts, the backs of motel brochures. I wrote letters to Evan I never intended to send. I wrote lists of things I missed, things I regretted, things I hated about myself now. I wrote until my hand cramped and my vision blurred, as if somehow if I could bleed out enough words, the ache inside me might lessen. It didn't. Each morning, I woke with a fresh sense of disbelief, a sickening moment where for one heartbeat I forgot, and then remembered all over again. One morning, desperate for any scrap of normalcy, I wandered into a coffee shop 2 blocks from the inn. The barista, a girl young enough to be Maya's age, smiled kindly when I hesitated at the register. "Name?" she asked, holding a marker poised over a cup. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. She tilted her head, the smile never leaving her face. "That's okay," she said softly. "We'll just call you Mystery Lady." Something cracked inside me, then, something small and stubborn that hadn't entirely died. I took the cup from her trembling hand and sat by the window, watching the waves crash against the distant rocks. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than numbness. It wasn't hope exactly, not yet, but it was the faintest stirring of a memory of the woman I had been before grief and betrayal had stripped me bare. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't gone entirely. It was on one of those sleepless nights, when even the sound of the ocean pounding the shore couldn't drown out the noise inside my head, that I finally opened Evan's old travel bag. I had thrown it into the car without thinking, the last thing I grabbed before leaving, a reflex born out of habit more than intention. It still smelled faintly of him, coffee and aftershave and something warmer, something uniquely Evan. At the bottom of the bag, tucked beneath a worn sweatshirt and a battered paperback novel, I found it. His journal. It was smaller than I remembered, leather-bound, the edges scuffed from years of being tossed into carry-ons and glove compartments. I traced my fingers over the familiar ridges of his handwriting embossed on the first page, and for a long time I couldn't open it. I was afraid of what I might find, afraid of the pieces of him I might have to let go all over again. But something in me, something stubborn and aching and unfinished, pushed past the fear. I opened the journal, and the first thing that slipped out was an envelope, thick and heavy, my name written across it in Evan's careful, deliberate script. My breath caught. My hands trembled. For a moment, the room blurred around me, the world narrowing down to that single fragile piece of paper. I unfolded the letter with painstaking care, as if it might disintegrate if I moved too quickly. My Claire began, and just seeing the words, just seeing the way he still claimed me, broke something inside me and mended something else all at once. If you're reading this, it means I'm not there anymore, and I hate that. I hate that I didn't get to hold your hand through this part. I hate that I couldn't shield you from it. But I need you to know. I saw it. I saw what you couldn't. The letter went on to explain that Evan had been worried about Miles for months. The probing questions about finances, the sudden interest in the house, the subtle undermining of Claire's confidence. I moved everything, Claire, Evan wrote. The assets, the accounts, the house. I put them into a trust under your name, locked tight where no one, not even family, can touch it without your say-so. The lawyer knows. You are protected. Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading, clinging to every line like a lifeline tossed into a storm. You are stronger than you know, Evan wrote. You always have been. Don't let anyone, especially not Miles, make you forget that. Find your voice again, Claire. Find your life again. It's still yours. There was a second envelope inside, marked for the lawyer, full of documents and instructions so detailed, so thorough, I could almost hear Evan's voice walking me through each step. For the first time since Evan had collapsed in our kitchen, the crushing weight on my chest lifted just a little. I hadn't been abandoned to the wolves, after all. Evan had seen the danger, and he had prepared for it. He had believed in me, even when I had stopped believing in myself. I pressed the letter to my chest, rocking slightly on the edge of the narrow bed, letting the tidal wave of grief and gratitude and raw, aching love wash over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't lost. I wasn't powerless. I had a map, a way forward. And for the first time in weeks, when I finally closed my eyes, sleep came, not as an enemy, but as a promise. Tomorrow I would begin. Tomorrow I would start reclaiming the life Miles had tried to steal. Tomorrow I would become the woman Evan had always known I could be. The next morning, I woke before the sun had even begun to touch the horizon. The ocean outside my window was a dark, restless mass, the waves beating a steady rhythm against the shore, like a battle drum calling me forward. I folded Evan's letter carefully, tucking it into my coat pocket, and slipped out of the inn without looking back. There was no more room for fear now, only purpose. The lawyer's name Evan had given me, Samuel Everett, was etched in my mind like a lifeline. His office was tucked away in a nondescript brick building downtown, a place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. The waiting room was small, lined with shelves of dusty law books and the faint scent of old paper and leather. When Mr. Everett emerged, a silver-haired man with kind eyes and a voice as steady as stone, he didn't waste time with condolences or small talk. He simply handed me a thick folder, carefully assembled and sealed. Jack trusted you completely, Mrs. Dawson, he said quietly. He made sure you had everything you needed, no matter what anyone else might have told you. Inside the folder was the truth, the full, brutal, liberating truth. The trust was ironclad. The house, the accounts, the investments, everything Evan and I had built, belonged to me and our children. Miles had no legal standing, no access, no claim. Everything he thought he had slowly maneuvered into his grasp was protected beyond his reach. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the documents, feeling the ground shift back beneath my feet. The weight that had pressed on my chest for weeks, the suffocating fear that I had lost everything, began to lift, replaced by something colder, sharper, more alive. I wasn't powerless. I had never been powerless. I had just forgotten. And now I remembered. I didn't rush. I didn't storm back home demanding answers. No, I moved quietly, methodically, with a patience I hadn't known I possessed. I changed the passwords on every account Evan had set up. I transferred funds into private accounts only I controlled. I revoked every access Miles had tried to weasel his way into, one by one, silently locking every door he thought he had keys to. Miles noticed, of course. The first time he tried to access an account and found himself denied, He probably assumed it was a glitch. The second time, he likely cursed the bank. But the third time, the fourth, the fifth, panic would have started to set in. Meanwhile, I stayed invisible, hidden in plain sight. I rented a small, furnished apartment under a different name in a nearby town, living quietly, rebuilding my life piece by careful piece. I found a part-time job shelving books at a local library, where no one knew me as Evan Dawson's widow or as Miles Dawson's burden. I didn't post on social media. I didn't call Maya or Owen. I let the silence grow thick and uncomfortable. I let Miles wonder. I let him stew in the growing realization that the thing he thought he had so carefully orchestrated was slipping away from him, one thread at a time. Every move I made was deliberate, a chess game he didn't even realize he was losing yet. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was moving. And soon I would stop moving in the shadows. I would step back into the light, not as the broken widow they had tried to paint me as, but as the woman Evan had loved, believed in, and trusted to finish the fight he had started. The day of reckoning was coming, and this time it would be on my terms. 2 months after I disappeared, I returned, not with drama, not with fanfare, just a quiet, deliberate step back into the life that had once been mine. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day no one would expect anything monumental to happen. That was exactly how I wanted it. I parked a few blocks away, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, and walked the familiar path to the house Evan and I had built together. My heart thudded against my ribs, not with fear, but with something steadier. Resolve. When I opened the door, the smell of home hit me so hard I almost staggered. Coffee, lemon polish, the faint ghost of Evan's cologne lingering in the corners. And then I heard him. Miles. His voice floated from the living room, casual, confident as if he owned the place. I stepped inside, shutting the door quietly behind me. Miles turned, phone pressed to his ear, and for a moment he just stared, the color draining from his face, so quickly it was almost comical. "Claire," he said, lowering the phone slowly. You're back. We've been so worried." I held up a hand, stopping him cold. "Save it." He froze, mouth half open, the lies already piling up behind his teeth, ready to spill out. I stepped further into the room, my boots thudding against the hardwood, each step deliberate, heavy with everything he had tried to take from me. From my coat, I pulled a thick envelope and tossed it onto the coffee table between us. It landed with a satisfying slap. "What's this?" he asked, his voice tight, wary now. "Proof," I said calmly, "of every lie you told, every account you tried to control, every conversation you manipulated." His eyes darted to the envelope, then back to me. He was calculating, searching for an angle, a weakness, but there was nothing left for him to find. "You've been through a lot," Miles started, voice syrupy, placating. "I know grief can make people confused. Maybe we should just sit down and know." My voice cut through the room like a blade. "You don't get to rewrite the story, Miles. Not this time." I could see it then, the realization sinking into him, the knowledge that he had already lost, that there was no recovering from this. His hands twitched at his sides, fists clenching and unclenching like he wanted to fight. But there was nothing left to fight for. "I have the trust documents," I continued, my voice steady. "I have the account records. I have the letters. Evan saw you coming before you even knew it." Miles opened his mouth again, probably to sputter some half-formed defense, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned away from him, my gaze sweeping over the living room, the photos still on the mantel, the quilt Evan's mother had made draped over the couch. This was my home, not his, not anymore. "I want you gone," I said without looking back. "Today." Silence stretched so long and taut it felt like it might snap. And then footsteps. Slow, reluctant, defeated. I listened as he gathered his things in a clumsy rush, muttering curses under his breath, the door slamming behind him a final, satisfying punctuation to the chapter he had tried so hard to write over my life. I stood there for a long moment after he left, letting the silence settle around me. It wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't oppressive. It was clean. It was mine. I crossed the room, trailing my fingers lightly over the back of Evan's favorite chair, the worn fabric familiar and comforting. Then I sank into it, the leather creaking under my weight, and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I had come home on my own terms. And Miles Dawson would never touch my life again. I thought, foolishly, that kicking Miles out would be the end of it, that once the door slammed behind him, the storm would break and peace would settle over everything Evan and I had built. But life, I've learned, rarely offers such clean endings. 2 weeks later, my lawyer called. "There's something you need to see," Samuel Everett said, his voice grave but calm. "We completed the forensic review you requested." I met him at his office the next morning, my hands trembling slightly as I signed the forms, as he slid the thick manila folder across the table. I opened it, and what stared back at me was worse than I had imagined. Miles hadn't started circling after Evan died. He had been circling long before. The reports detailed attempts by Miles to access Evan's financial information months before his death, emails to banks posing as Evan, calls to lawyers trying to clarify ownership of assets, even efforts to move small amounts of money into shared accounts under the guise of assisting with family matters. He had positioned himself like a vulture waiting for the moment to strike, carefully, quietly, building a web designed to catch me the second Evan was gone. And worst of all, Evan had seen it. His final journal entries confirmed what I now understood with brutal clarity. Evan had known that betrayal was coming, and had fought, in his own quiet way, to shield me from it. I sat there for a long time, staring at the pages, feeling the layers of humiliation and grief peel away to reveal something harder beneath, something unbreakable. I could have pursued charges: fraud, identity theft, attempted embezzlement. The evidence was solid enough to bury Miles in court for years. But I didn't, because revenge wasn't the point anymore. Truth was. That afternoon, I made copies of everything, every email, every transaction, every page of Evan's warnings, and I mailed them separately to Maya and Owen. No letters, no explanations, just the truth, delivered cold and undeniable. Then I waited. It didn't take long. First came Maya's text: "Mom, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Then Owen's call, his voice tight with emotion. I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know. I thought he was helping. I thought. His voice broke, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. They had trusted Miles, just like I had. And now they had to live with the weight of that betrayal, just as I had. I didn't absolve them. I didn't rush to heal the wounds. Some things had to scar over naturally, or they would never heal properly at all. But I listened, and slowly the space between us began to shrink again, not with the false, frantic closeness of guilt, but with the cautious, painful honesty that only comes after everything else has been stripped away. As for Miles, the silence from his side was deafening. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had left Asheville altogether, his reputation in tatters, the whispers of what he had done growing louder with every retelling. No one trusted him now. No one welcomed him. He hadn't just lost access to the money. He had lost everything he thought he could control. In the end, he destroyed himself, with nothing more than his own greed, his own arrogance. And I didn't have to lift a single finger to make it happen. Justice, I realized, doesn't always come with a gavel and a sentence. Sometimes it comes in the form of silence, of doors quietly closing, of a life rebuilt stronger than the one they tried to steal. And sometimes that's the loudest justice of all. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not empty. At first, Maya and Owen reached out cautiously. A text here, a missed call there, like children testing the thickness of ice before daring to step forward. I didn't push. I didn't chase. I let them come at their own pace, knowing that real healing isn't something you can demand. It's something you invite and wait for. One afternoon, Maya showed up at my door. She stood there awkwardly, her hands stuffed deep into the pockets of her jacket, her face pale and tight around the eyes. She looked older somehow, not in years, but in the weary, painful way people age when they realize the world is more complicated than they had once believed. "I don't know where to start," she said, her voice cracking on the first word. "Start here," I said simply, stepping aside to let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Miles had once tried to erase me, and for a long time we said nothing. The sunlight slanted across the wood between us, highlighting the tiny scratches and stains Evan used to joke were our family history written in coffee and crayons. Finally, Maya spoke, halting, raw, unfiltered. She apologized for believing Miles, for doubting me, for letting someone else's voice drown out her own memories of the woman who had raised her. She cried, shoulders shaking, and I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "I should have seen it," she whispered. "I should have fought for you." "You were grieving," I said quietly. "So was I. We all made mistakes." Forgiveness didn't come instantly. It wasn't a magic switch flipped by a few tearful words. But the door was open now, and that was enough. Owen called that evening, his voice low and rough with emotion. He didn't try to justify his silence. He didn't offer excuses. He simply said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." And that was all I needed. Slowly we began to rebuild. Not the old, easy closeness that had once existed without question. That version of our family was gone, buried alongside the illusions Miles had shattered. No, what we were building now was something different, something harder, but stronger. They came over for dinners again, awkward at first, like strangers relearning a familiar language. We cooked simple meals together, burned the garlic bread twice, laughed too loudly at bad jokes. We took long walks by the river Evan had loved so much, telling stories about him. Real stories, full of both light and shadow, not the polished eulogies grief sometimes forces on us. Maya started bringing old photo albums, flipping through them slowly, her fingers tracing the edges of the past with a reverence I hadn't seen in years. Owen helped me fix the sagging fence Evan had always meant to repair, working in comfortable silence as the afternoon sun warmed our backs. Little by little, memory by memory, we stitched something new from the remnants of everything we had lost. I didn't need their forgiveness to be whole, but I welcomed their love, this time not as something I clung to for survival, but as something I chose freely, as an equal, as a woman who had fought to stand again on her own terms. One evening, as we sat around the fire pit Evan had built with his own hands, Maya leaned her head against my shoulder, and Owen threw another log onto the flames. We didn't talk about Miles. We didn't need to. The silence between us was full, not of grief, but of peace. For the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't mourning what had been lost. I was living what had been found. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. There were still moments, sharp and sudden, when the ache of Evan's absence caught me off guard, a forgotten note tucked in a drawer, a familiar song playing on the radio. Grief, I realized, wasn't something you conquered. It was something you carried, like a scar just under the skin, invisible most days but never really gone. But the weight had shifted. It no longer pressed me into the ground. It steadied me. I spent my mornings tending the garden Evan had loved so much, the rosemary bush wild and fragrant, the tomato vines stubbornly creeping past their cages. I let my hands sink into the dirt, feeling the earth give way and hold me at the same time, and somewhere between planting new seeds and pulling stubborn weeds, I remembered how to breathe again. I started painting again, too, not because anyone expected it, not to impress or to distract, but because there were colors inside me that needed a place to live. Some nights, I sat by the window Evan used to favor, a cup of tea cooling between my palms, and wrote letters I never sent. Letters to Evan. Letters to the woman I used to be. Letters to the woman I was still becoming. I stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. I didn't attend big social gatherings. I didn't join grief support groups or post curated updates online. Healing, for me, didn't look like triumphant returns or dramatic transformations. It looked like quiet mornings spent walking barefoot in the dew-drenched grass. It looked like saying no without explaining. It looked like sitting in the stillness and realizing I was enough. Maya and Owen visited often, sometimes with awkward silences that slowly softened into easy laughter. They didn't try to fix me, and I didn't try to fix them. We simply shared the space, each honoring the way grief and love had reshaped us. One Sunday evening, as we sat around the fire pit, Maya handed me a small, neatly wrapped package. I raised an eyebrow, and she shrugged, a shy smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Open it," she said. Inside was a new journal, the cover a rich, deep blue, the pages thick and empty, waiting. "For your next chapter," Owen said quietly. I blinked hard against the sudden sting in my eyes. Next chapter. Not a replacement. Not a denial of what had come before. A continuation. That night, after they left, I sat by the window with the new journal resting on my lap. I didn't rush to fill the pages. I just held it there, feeling the weight of possibility settle warmly against my palms. For so long, I had let others write the story of who I was supposed to be, the dutiful wife, the fragile widow, the woman too broken to stand without being held up. No more. This story, the one ahead of me, would be mine, written in my own hand, lived on my own terms. I opened the journal to the first page, the blankness staring back at me not with accusation, but with invitation. And with a steady hand, I began.